Everybody, thanks so much for joining. Today we have a friend of mine, Nick Newby, who is one of the co-founders of NuView Analytics. And kind of the fun story behind this is we used to work together at a corporate job. And I remember we would do those little side projects. You would enter us into, what was it, those competitions where we could put together some analytic projects and try to win prizes or things like that. So we go way back. Gosh, probably like 12 years back, which
Yeah.
is really awesome. But I'm excited to have him on today and speak to you why metrics are important, why using Power BI is something that even small businesses need. And we'll kind of talk through of what does that look like, how to get started in it, how do you even know what to do with a dashboard. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I'm excited for it as well. Yeah, I think we were doing those Kaggle competitions
Yes.
before AI and data science and machine learning was cool. It was you and me, like in between phone calls,
Yep.
crunching through a bunch of numbers to try to come up with, uh, cool projects, side projects. That was
Mhm.
a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I remember too, you used to build out it was the basketball metrics, right? That you would build so then you would know how to gamble on the games and make sure that your fantasy teams won.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think hopefully Anthony, my other co-founder, doesn't listen to this because if the Nuggets or the Broncos come calling for somebody to do analytics for them, then he's still going to have to run NuView on his own. But
Yeah, you'll be like, I'm
that's
out.
definitely where my that's definitely where my analytics started. That's for sure.
Yeah. So if you want to give just a little bit of like background of you've always loved analytics and how you got to the point and then when you started up NewView.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. So NuView we started the business about 7 years ago. Prior to that, like you mentioned, I've always been a data person. Did some in college, spent a lot of time in sports analytics, and found out that I needed to spend time doing a real job. And so I focused instead on legalized gambling in the stock market instead. So I did a little foray into financial services and being a stockbroker. That's where Christy and I met at Standard and Poor's and spent time building data warehouses and databases for money market funds and hedge funds and things like that. And that kind of got me deep into big data, and kind of led now to what NuView Analytics is after a couple of stops along the way at a startup company where Anthony and I, my co-founder, met, and he was head of finance and I was head of data science for that small company. And one of the things we found is I wanted to do a bunch of really cool data science problems at that particular startup. Anthony, being head of finance, was like, we need to understand our core business metrics first. He's like, how much does it cost to roll a truck? How much does it cost to get a customer? Like key block and tackling type of problems. And I, having hands on the data, got to help him build all of that out into dashboards like in Power BI and in Tableau. And we were able to drive a lot of value from that, even though it wasn't really the cool, sexy things like in data science and the AI world. It was really what the business needed, and that's what we've now found that the majority of businesses are really focused on. Even if AI is kind of what the shiny object is, they need to have their data architecture and infrastructure in a good place before they can even think about some of those cool projects. And that's really where NuView focuses on is how do we make sure that the blocking and tackling is done correctly and you have your data warehouse, your data visualizations built out. So then you know those key metrics and you don't have to worry about trying to find those every time that you're trying to answer a board meeting or trying to make a key decision for your business. Sorry, that was a little bit of a long way to get back
Oh,
to
it's
where we are today.
good. But yeah, now and it's to your point, it's very much needed. I know a lot of companies come in and they have kind of an idea of, hey, we loosely look at a specific metric to help us, but then a lot of times, kind of what you and Anthony experienced, like we need to know all of these things over here, and they sometimes get focused on the wrong things. And I think that's something that you guys can come in together and you're helping build out of what is your guys' vision of things that need to be measured and how does it need to show up, who are your key decision makers. So can you kind of walk us through the process of, hey, there's a new client that's coming in and they don't really know where to start, they just know they need to start tracking a specific set of metrics that they're loosely doing on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, so the good thing is now, like you mentioned, a lot of companies do have an Excel spreadsheet that they're tracking things, or even a note paper. We have one client that was tracking his daily clients every single day on a piece of paper, and I was like, hey, that's somewhere that we can start
Yeah.
from. Now let's kind of back into, well, where are you getting that metric? What system can we pull that data from? And then how do we build out a beyond just you writing down numbers on a sheet of paper? But really, it starts with what are your key systems? Where do you operate out of within your business right now that we can start to pull some of the data from? So that's going to be your accounting system, your ERP systems. If you're in healthcare, it's EMR systems, a lot of marketing software. Where are those systems that are going to house a lot of your data already, and how do we at least start to get access to those? And then how do we start to understand the ways that you make decisions today? Because one of the things I think is really interesting is especially with founder-led businesses, they oftentimes, even if they don't know the key KPIs that they're operating their business off of, they have them in their head that they know
Hmm.
what makes their business better, worse, or otherwise. I think about back to a roofing CEO that said that they don't use any metrics, but then we asked, well, how do you know if your business is doing well? He's like, well, if I got 20 calls this weekend, then I know this week's going to be busy for installations. I was like, all right, so you have metrics, you just don't know how to track them as metrics. So kind of once we understand how the decision process works with a key leader of the business, whether that's CEO, CFO, CMO, wherever they happen to be in their business. Once you understand how they're making decisions, you can really start to create a set of key metrics that are going to drive that business and bring that data and then various layers of that data to their fingertips, and then they can start to make those quick decisions. And it's great for them to be able to see ways that they can, um, you know, like, hey, I've never thought about this business in this way, because we get a different granularity of metric than anyone has had before.
Yeah, and I think that's always eye-opening too, especially because the founders, to your point, it's like, oh, I know I need about 20 of these a week. That makes us busy, but then may not know the other metrics that come from that of, okay, do I have enough workers on this, or do I have enough machine time, or whatever that looks like to be able to handle things.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, which I think is interesting. Have you seen any shifts from the small business world starting to utilize metrics more like larger organizations have?
Yeah, I feel like actually smaller organizations, I think, have actually moved faster than larger organizations. Larger organizations have the benefit of having teams of people that can create metrics or give them data. So they actually end up relying less on the right infrastructure, because you can just put bodies at a problem and say,
Mhm.
okay, we need to decide which marketing channel is most effective for us. A large company can go task 4 people to say, hey, go figure anything out. They pull a bunch of spreadsheets together, they crunch a bunch of numbers, and then they come up with an opinion that's in a 50-page slide deck, and they make a
Yeah.
decision off of that. So that's like the large company view. Small companies don't have the benefit of that, right? They need to have a metric to make a decision. They also don't have the benefit of time, right? A lot of times a small company needs to have that data at their fingertips quickly, because they need to make a decision at the end of the meeting, right? If they're an EOS type of a business, and they're operating off of a structured executive team structure like that, they have to make a decision at the end of the meeting and then go and enact it to make a difference for their business. They don't have the luxury of waiting 3 or 4 months like companies like Christy and I used to work at, right? That we can just wait
Or even
until
longer.
exactly, and just wait to make those decisions. So I actually think that smaller companies are moving faster. The downside is that they don't necessarily have as much of the data to start to think about. So they kind of just have to use what they have in front of them, and they don't necessarily have the infrastructure. But now many of the tools are off the shelf drag and drop tools that allow you access to metrics that you've not had before anyway. So a lot of small businesses are able to quickly pull together some key metrics, and it's just a matter of kind of narrowing into focus what's going to be really beneficial, and then also making sure that right infrastructure is going to be readily usable in the future, so that you're not having to kind of recreate and do the same
Mhm.
process over and over again.
And I think a lot of the tools now also they're much more affordable for small businesses to invest in, where back in the day it was very expensive to get into. Just
Yeah.
for point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. So a lot of the tools, even like Tableau right now is, for a long time was the clear leader in visualization, even at their higher cost, because it was $600 to $800 for a license. But for a small business, if you're driving the majority of your executive metrics off of that, that's not a cost prohibitive number for an annual license. But then Power BI comes out at $10 a month,
Yeah.
right? And undercuts it, and then also creates a better product at the same time. And I don't want this to become a Tableau versus Power BI argument, but I mean, there's a lot of things that Power BI has brought to the fingertips of a small business owner because they already put it into their Office 365 accounts, so they can access it. They can do a lot of the things they need to on a relatively free or near free version, that they don't necessarily need to go pay a lot for lots of other tools.
Mhm.
Domo was on the other spectrum from Tableau, right? They were in the 25 to 30K range, and now they're going to go up to 100K for a mid-sized business. That's just like that's not even palatable for most
No.
businesses to handle. So
It's kind of like they take the easy way of we don't want to work with the smaller, we'll just move our price up and then we can stick with playing with the larger organizations. But yeah.
exactly, yeah, they're definitely pricing themselves into a specific market that they want.
Mhm. They are. When you're working with these small, do you have a preference, or is it usually the client kind of driving if they want to go the Tableau route, or if they want to go Power BI, or whatever it's working on? And then also, second point to that question is when you're looking at the software that they have. Sometimes smaller organizations they're still on a QuickBooks, and how is that going to integrate over versus somebody that's already on an ERP system and then needs those BI tool or BI tools and whatever way that shows up.
Yeah. So for us, we work with companies to try to find and give them a recommendation of the right tool set to utilize. So we do give a recommendation. We do have preferences, but we're tech agnostic, so we like to work with different types of tools for different companies. So oftentimes we'll try to work with whatever tech stack they already have. Again, kind of going back to the quick mobility that smaller businesses have is a lot of times they have tools already in place, and we don't want to come in and say, okay, trash these set of tools. Like you gave the example of QuickBooks. Even though we don't do ERP implementation, we wouldn't come in and say, oh, you have to be on Sage, otherwise we're not going to work
Right.
with you. Right? We would say, here's all the tools that you have. Here's how we can leverage what you have, plus add on a couple of other things to be able to make it really usable for you, and then give that implementation. Oftentimes, companies right now, probably 60 to 70% of companies are staying in the Microsoft tech stack because of kind of the Office 365 connections that are already there. But oftentimes, if there is some tool set that's already been in place, like a Domo or Tableau, somebody's already used Tableau, or there's a data warehouse that somebody already created, a Snowflake or a Redshift, then it will try to utilize those tools and kind of fit them into a puzzle that's going to work for that company. The benefit is that most tools now work really closely together. You don't really have to be siloed into one set of tools just because of a decision you've made in the past. And then even more so on the source system side of things, like QuickBooks and other ERP systems or accounting systems, because most of them have an API. You're able to pull that into any tool set that you want. And you have kind of a wide array of menu options as far as cost and performance and things like that. So we do have a lot of options at our fingertips that we can focus on. So the tool set that you come from or the source systems that you come from don't necessarily limit where you're going to go in the future. There's probably some small nuance to that, but for the
Yeah.
most part, you can kind of use the full menu.
Which is nice. And then you're not having all these added costs or something that come in of, hey, we're going to give you BI plus we got to give you a whole bunch of new tools to use. Yeah, because that gets in there a lot. And I know one thing I stress with a lot of people too is having clean data, because if you don't have good data, you don't get good results. And how often are you having those conversations with your clients, or are you helping them come up with a plan of how to do any data cleansing before you can actually implement what you need to do for them?
Yeah, so it's an easy answer to the first part of the question. 100% of the time we're having this conversation with clients. I would highlight though that I think a lot of times people think that you need to go through a big cleansing or a backup cleanup option to get your data ready, right? We always get asked, is our data ready for an implementation like this? Because we know it's dirty.
Mhm.
All data is dirty, no matter what business it is, no matter how big it is, no matter how much money or time you've spent trying to clean it up. It's all dirty all the time. So what we actually focus on instead is using tools like Power BI or Tableau to visualize the metrics that matter to you, and then highlight or shine a light on the areas where the dirtiness is a problem, right?
Mm.
So like I always use the example of if you want to look at what your sales team's cancellation rate or cancellation reason is, but your sales reps never look at or never put in their cancellation reason in the reason box. Well, give them a table that shows count of cancellate by cancellation reason, and it's going to show 100% are null. Well,
Yeah.
quickly you're going to change the behavior of those sales folks because you say like, hey, we're going to start monitoring what you guys put here, and they'll change it the very next day. They'll
Mhm.
even do some cleanup for you, kind of going back in time, because they know that like, hey, that's the change management that we need to like implement right away. So I actually prefer to go that route than doing a wholesale historical cleanup, because a lot of times people will say, we need to clean up our GL from 3 years ago. It's like, well, are you going to
Yeah.
look at data from 3 years ago? If not, then why are we worried about it? Like, let's just
Mhm.
start looking at what matters today and change behavior today.
Yeah. I think people get caught up sometimes in those historical numbers of, oh, we need to look back so far and bring this over versus, hey, we can start today and go forward. Or maybe it's a couple of months prior to, like 3, 4 months, that you have some minor cleanups you need to do. Do you see that with clients too, where they get to the point where they're like, okay, I get it. I don't need to give you all this history. Let's pick a point in time and go from there forward with cleansing the data.
Yeah, it does take some time sometimes to, and it depends on who in the organization is kind of driving the decision around analytics on how far they'll go back. Found
Yeah.
that finance folks are, we need to go back 35 years because that's the day that we started this business. And then marketing folks are like, well, I can't show new impressions yesterday, so why do I care about what happened yesterday? I can only care about tomorrow. And that's kind of then others fall in between there, but everyone kind of does start to realize like, what are we actually meaningfully making decisions around, and let's focus on the data set that falls in that range.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you're working with these clients, you're doing a mix of dashboards that are, charts and whatever that looks like, plus, kind of the metric numbers that would come in more looking like an Excel spreadsheet that's maybe it's showing percentages or however they want to show their data. So how do you guys kind of come up with a plan of what needs to be, visual versus what needs to be like those data points?
Yeah, I think so. We work pretty closely with each team and with each leader to understand kind of how they're going to go about making their decisions and what's going to be valuable for them. I think unfortunately the majority of the business world is still so focused in spreadsheets that they want everything to be in columns and rows, and they kind of can't break out of like making that decision, even though they realize that they're not going to be able to see the same metric the same way if they don't look at it visually. We were looking at like a marketing dashboard yesterday where somebody was looking at their lead conversion rate, and they had it in a table by state, which was interesting on its own. But I was like, oh, well, what did it look like last month? And they changed their date, and they showed me what it was last month. I was like, oh, what about 3 months before that? And they changed their date again. What about 6 months before that? Okay, well, now I needed to remember all of those numbers in order to really drive any decision. Whereas if you put all of that on a chart and each state was aligned, now I can quickly visualize what happened over time with this particular metric. So a lot of times it's kind of showing and thinking about again what their decision process is going to be, and then giving them an option that's going to help with that decision process. And we kind of iterate with them to figure out what's going to make the most sense. But I do wish, just holistically, right, as maybe some of my mission as a data person, that we would get out of rows and columns
Yeah.
as a business society and get more into visualization, because I just think you can see so much more. I had an AI expert that we work with told me last week. He's like, data is great, but a picture still is worth 1,000 words, right? And it's like, if you see it in a visualization, that's still more than chatbot can create for you, any set of columns can create for you. You can see and understand a picture much better.
Yeah. And I think too, it helps with accountability also because people can look at the rows and columns. They're like, oh, okay, 2% difference, or something that seems very nominal. And then you look at it in a chart view, and that's a significant change when you see it. And that way, and it's like, oh, I really do need to change, this.
Yeah. Though there's one catch with that though, right? Is that you can also manipulate how a
You
chart is
totally
going to
can.
look. And you can narrow into a really small window, and then it looks like a huge drop whenever it's like, well, actually, was this that impactful? So it's kind of that's the double-edged sword of my comment earlier about wanting things in charts.
Yeah, and I think, and you see too, and I mean, I've seen this with some of my clients. They almost make metrics that tell the story the way they want to tell it, or they cancel out other metrics. And I'm sure that's a process too when you're kind of helping them put their plan together. Of okay, you want this metric because what is the story that you're wanting it to tell? Because it's canceling this metric out over here because maybe you don't want to have this accountability pop up.
Yeah, what we usually try to help people focus on is trying to narrow down to as few metrics as possible to drive their business. So we think an executive dashboard should have between 6 and 10 key metrics on it. Definitely no more than 10, and probably no fewer than 6, because you do need to understand different key areas of the business. But then we think of each executive dashboard, let's call it 10 metrics. If that's covering 5 different departments, each department should have kind of 2 main metrics that are driving their portion of the business. And then their underlying dashboard can have 5 to 10 of those, say, marketing metrics, or 5 to 10 sales metrics, or 5 to 10 operations metrics. So kind of thinking about like a kind of a nesting the decision metrics into one. So you still may have 50 or 100 metrics driving your business, but you only have 2 or 3 that you're focused on for one particular area, and then those kind of nest down into lower level KPIs that you can work
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, that's good. One question that came up that I think would be really good to kind of have you speak to as we were talking a little bit about this is this one from Mecker. What are some common misconceptions business owners have about those BI tools that you'd want to clear up? Because that kind of goes in a line with you want to make sure they're picking the right metrics too, but then also sometimes what are those pushbacks that people have of, hey, I need this, but I don't know if I need this, or getting them on board with wanting to go down that route.
Yeah, I think some of the misconceptions that would be helpful to clear up is making sure that people understand that on the visualization tool, for instance, all of the tools can essentially do everything that you want them to do. It may just take a little bit more effort, right? So if you're in a meeting and somebody says, oh, we have to use Tableau because Power BI can't do this, that's probably a false statement, right? Tableau and Power BI can do 99% of the same things, and they're going to cover 99% of anything that you're ever going to want to do in visualization. And even Domo and Looker and Mode are all in the same boat. They're going to cover 99% of the ocean that you're going to want to cover. So this idea that like you have to pick the right tool is really what I think is false. The right tool is the tool that you start using, right? You need to pick a tool that you're going to use, and that's a common misconception of we need to evaluate and find the right tool. So that's where a lot of times it's budget, and you figure out which one's going to fit the right budget. Which one do we already have some adoption internally on, so that people aren't going to think that they're going to be scared away by a new tool. So I think kind of getting past this, oh, our tool doesn't do what we want this other tool to do, so let's let this other tool work for us instead. So kind of helping to clear that up is always key. And then I think the other misconception is thinking that the tool is going to do too much for what its particular purpose is. So I think of like the visualization again, thinking that it's going to house your data, transform your data, drive insights. Those are 3 areas of the data journey that Power BI doesn't do, right? Power BI and Tableau are the visualization layer, and you should think of it and know it as that layer. You shouldn't think that it's going to automatically give you insights. It's not going to automatically give you the why for that particular metric. It's also not going to do a great job at transforming or storing your data. So knowing that you kind of, when you're picking tools, you need to make sure that the tool, you're expecting the tool to do exactly the thing it's supposed to do, not trying to make it do more than that. And that's kind of, sometimes a common misconception of like, oh, well, once we have Power BI, we're gonna have all these insights. Like, well,
Yeah.
if you haven't built it with the right data in it, then it's not going to give you anything.
Mm-mm.
Having a focus there is always helpful.
And if you don't use the results that it's telling you too, I know that a lot of people, that they'll build something out, it's really pretty, and then they don't do anything with the metrics that are there for them.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a big one. And then one other one here from Avery: do smaller teams rely more on institution along dashboards, intuition, sorry, and then how do you balance that with data?
It's interesting. Let me think about it a little bit. So do smaller teams rely more on intuition alongside dashboards? How do you balance that with data? Um, I think smaller teams are, I don't know. I think actually smaller teams are sometimes forced to leverage data more because they don't have the bandwidth to or to spend their time knowing what's happening with the business. So they actually have to rely on dashboards or metrics to help to drive that more often, um, than relying on their intuition. Um, I would probably caveat that with, that's assuming that they have dashboards available, right? Because if they don't have dashboards available, then they are relying on their intuition more because they don't have the capacity to have built dashboards or to focus on data. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg. If you already have dashboards, then small teams can really rely and drive their whole business off of them and off of those metrics reliably. If they don't have it, then they're forced to rely on their intuition because they haven't had the capacity to build out a data environment up to that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, that's a good one. Can you give an example of like a client that you've worked with that has had, some really great things that have happened because they started utilizing, the metrics in place of, they went from here to a big growth place because now they got to see their data in one place, and how that kind of shifted things?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting ones is actually with the dermatology practice that we worked with, where they were able to, um, we looked at all of their different case volume, a bunch of stuff around patient care and about conversion rates into different types of products. But one of the most kind of operational insights that we were able to find in looking at their data, was they were looking at cancellation rates across the organization. And no matter what, they kept on slicing by clinic, by provider, by state, by where the location was, by different things, different types of products, and they kept on seeing an increase in their cancellation rates. And they really couldn't understand like where the cancellation problem was. They just knew that they had this 25% cancellation problem, kind of universally across their business, and they need to figure out, well, if we can decrease this, we can save on some of our costs of additional providers for no reason, but then also just can continue to kind of get folks in the door. So once we actually kind of resliced it by day of week and time of day, we actually started seeing that the majority of their cancellations were happening on Friday afternoons, so the end of the week, end of the day. And then they actually had policies that showed that they would have to be charged if they didn't cancel their appointments within 48 hours, or if they cancel it within 48 hours, then they'd get charged a fee. So we actually saw like the majority of the cancellations were happening as they're, within, outside of that 48-hour window. So their
Mm-hmm.
mechanism was working, right, to make sure that they at least knew when the cancellation was going to happen, but they weren't doing anything to operationalize. Oh, okay, we have a bunch of cancellations, but they didn't pay attention to kind of when that was happening. So it wasn't until they started realizing that, like, okay, they're happening on Friday afternoons. We know at least by Wednesday, we can now shift the way we're going to cover all of our practices on Friday afternoons. So they ultimately actually shifted to do like kind of longer days Monday through Thursday, and then shorter days on Fridays. So they were covering, so their providers kind of felt like they still had the same amount of time and, hours wise. But then they were able to get more people in on the first appointment, as opposed to having a cancellation and then come back next month, next week, next month, something like that. So that was really interesting for them to be able to
It is.
adjust their business. So their providers were happier because they knew that they were going to have full days. And then they were able to capture a lot more of those, of their customers. So I think they were able to drive their cancellation rate down from the mid 20s down into the low teens. And they're kind of trying to drive down under 10% for their cancellation rate.
Yeah, that's a huge win on all of that. Um, One last big question for you is around security. I know that always comes up with, hey, how do we know our data is, protected and all of that? How do you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think in NuView in particular, we focus on building all of the infrastructure in the client environment. So, I think our preference or recommendation for you, for any company, is to make sure that you own your data, not a third party. A lot of tools that you end up purchasing or signing up for, the data will, they'll say it's your data, but it's going to move into their server or their systems. So anyone that's going to try to move your data out of your system already kind of like brings up a lot of red flags for me, because the data should be able to live in your system and in your environment. The other thing is on your ETL process, so extract, transform, and load. When you're pulling data from those source systems, you don't need to pull key, PII type of information into your analytics environment, because that's not going to help you make decisions about cancellation rate, right? So if you know the birth date, social security number, and first name, last name of the person at the dermatology practice, if you know all that information on their cancellation, that doesn't change the fact that 25% are canceling on Fridays. So you don't even need any of that data to flow into your analytics environment. That should stay in the source system. So like in that case, the EMR.
Hmm.
And EMR is, spends billions of dollars making sure that that data is safe. So again, kind of going back to my point of like, let the right tool do what it's good at. Don't make it do something that it's not good at. Let the EMR system or the ERP accounting system manage all the security of the raw data, and then only pull the information that's going to help drive analytics, which oftentimes is not PII, is not going to be any salary information from your employees, is not going to be social security numbers from your employees. That's not going to be valuable for analytics decisions. So why even have it in your analytics environment? So that's
Hmm.
stop, put a gate right up at the front and not even let that come into the environment. Um, and then even whenever it's data in the system, I know it looks like Avery pointed out about row level security. There's certain times where you maybe you want to look at regional sales by region, and you don't want one regional manager to see what the other regional manager can see. That's security, but it's security within the business and within the analytics. A lot of the tools already, Tableau and Power BI being the two main ones, have the ability to secure the data that you have based on the role or job function that you have. So your CEO can see all the data, your regional managers can see only their region, their providers can only see their provider or their clinic that they're working on. So making sure that you implement that is always something to make sure and focus on as well.
Yeah, that's a good point because yeah, some people they get hung up on that fact of like, yeah, we need to do this, but I want to make sure nobody else can see what I see or things like that. So yeah, that does pop up a lot. And then, well, actually, one last question before we go today is just around the AI, because that's such the buzzword right now and it's showing up everywhere, whether people are utilizing it fully or not. How are you seeing AI come into like the metrics and the analytic world of what you're doing with clients today?
Yeah, so obviously it is the buzzword, right? And in our belief, and maybe it's a little bit slanted, but is we believe that AI is just a data problem, right? It's like if you have the right data, you can answer the right types of problems, the right types of questions. The tooling or the systems and the code that sits on top of it, in some ways is different, but in a lot of ways, it's no different than the econometrics models that I worked with 20 years ago in college, right? It's the same types of modeling. Hasn't changed that much. And maybe some AI folks would disagree with me on that, but really, it's if you have the right data, you can answer the right types of questions. So it's really a data problem more than anything. One of the things that we're seeing be an issue though with AI is going back to again like making sure you're using a tool for what it's supposed to be used for, and not assuming that it's going to do more than that. So a lot of folks think that, oh, if I just have AI, it's going to help
Hmm.
insights from my business. Well, again, if you don't have the right data infrastructure in place, then it has no data to make a decision on. If you haven't given it the context in the data warehouse, it doesn't know that these three different fields that all say revenue that came out of your QuickBooks instance, which one is the revenue that you're trying to make a decision off of? because those are all going to come from QuickBooks and they all have different meanings, but you need to tell it that context. If you haven't given it that, it's not going to be able to do more than kind of give you a garbage in, garbage out type of answer. So you really need to utilize AI for what it's supposed to be, and that's able to like synthesize large amounts of data, but the data already has to be there in a good format to be able to leverage. One benefit to AI that is going to be even more widely utilized for small businesses is a lot of the coding. I know somebody in the chat had mentioned about DAX coding. It can do a great job of writing a lot of DAX formulas now for Power BI. So you don't have to be a SQL expert or a DAX expert to be able to utilize AI to help to give you a little bit of a leg up there. It's not going to build 100% of your dashboard though. So, but if you need it to create the right way to build a calendar filter in Power BI, that's a great use of AI. Telling it to build you an HR dashboard, not a great use of AI. So kind of making sure that you're using the tool for what its purpose is probably the best value.
Yeah, it makes me think about when we used to build all those SQL queries when we were at Standard & Poor's. Oh man, I hated those days so much. I'm like, you build out something and then it would fail. And it's like, oh gosh, which line was it that I messed up on?
Well, I just remember I remember one of the databases used a star schema, and at the time we liked using the big flat table that was all just one column and all rows, and at the time it was just a pain to write all the queries for. And now all of our team builds everything with the star schema because it is more performant, and I understand why S&P did it the way they did it back when. I definitely hated it whenever I was coding back then, but now it makes so much more sense. So any of our team that builds a big long table, then I'm going back and correcting them on it.
Yeah, you're like, no, this works well. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing a little bit about what you do in your world. If people want to reach out to you or learn more, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, thanks. First of all, thanks, Christy, for having me on. This is exciting. We've gotten to work together, and then also work together at like you said, the corporate world before we made the jump to supporting small businesses together. So excited to have been able to help along this journey. In order to get to reach out to us, LinkedIn is obviously great. You can just send me a note on LinkedIn or message on LinkedIn. We can connect over email after that. Or email directly to me. It also works. Nick@NuViewAnalytics.com. I'm sure you'll be able to put that in a chat somewhere after this. But yeah, email or LinkedIn message is always great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And everybody, if you have additional questions, feel free to keep posting them in there. We'll reply to them, all throughout the week or whatnot. But